Hello, Night Nation. Trace Trolko, joined by Adam Eaton. Welcome into Sons Today, a roundtable discussion around a square table. Guys, we welcome in Robert Aronoff. You know him as 2 letters, 2 words on Twitter. What's your new title? Are you publisher of Latavius Knights247 with Latavius Murray? Is that the correct
co-publisher of Knights247 with Latavius Murray.
Yeah, and Joe Lonergan. Welcome in on
Thank
our
you.
discussion as we recap Big 12 Media Days with Andrew Cherico, splitting duty between the Sons of UCF and the new venture with 247.
Yes.
And Matthew Turner, welcome in. Photographer, master, and also reporter now in these Big 12 Media Days. And we're going to discuss what's going on here in Frisco, Texas over the last couple of days. Gentlemen, big news on day one involves UCF, ironically, and not for anything Scott Frost said on the main stage, not in anything he said to you or in the media availability, but perhaps what he said to the Athletics' Chris Vanini. And we'll get into those comments. But first, Adam, you spoke with him on a one-on-one. What were your takeaways from maybe a more relaxed Scott Frost in the early morning?
Yeah, I think he's confident in his team. I think he likes what he has. He doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. He's very upfront about that. He's not telling you who the quarterback is, so anybody who thinks he is, temper your expectations.
He didn't tell you?
No, we did not mention who the quarterback will be. But he seems very confident in his team, very sure of what he's doing right now. And I think he likes where he's at. The sense I got from Coach Frost was he's back at UCF. He loves being here. He's happy. His exact quote to me was, I love getting up and going to work every day at UCF. If you're a Knight fan, there's nothing better you probably want to hear than that.
Andrew, you've had opportunity to speak with Coach Frost during multiple media availabilities at the time of hire and over the course of spring camp. Anything different from Coach Frost here in this setting?
It seemed like the whole talk of the unpredictability of the Big 12, it got him almost motivated that a quick turnaround could possibly happen. Frost mentioned that he won quicker than expected when his first time at UCF in 2016. And everybody's wondering, like, can he have another turnaround like that? Can he shock the world almost in a way? And I wouldn't say he's saying, oh, we're going 13-0, but I think he wants to put the expectation, okay, yeah, we're not rebuilding, we're reloading, and it's going to take a process, but we can come out of this better than I think a lot of people expected. And I think he's sharing that message with the people in his locker room as well. And it's talking about the culture. I feel like when you hear Scott Frost, you think about the culture and what that brings. And I think a true brotherhood is being built. And just hearing the players, and he was listening to the players speaking, and he said, I'm taking pride in that they're all claiming that this is real. They're all claiming that they are together, they know what it means to be a Knight, and they're ready for the season.
Well, I'll say, to add something quickly, he's very aware and I think kind of prideful in the process he took to identify these players on this team. He talked a little bit, Terry Mahadra talked to us about the interview process. He interviewed guys to make sure they would fit this team. He didn't just take anybody. So I think he's really proud and wants to share with Knight Nation, we didn't just go grab anybody on the street corner, that they were thoughtful about their process. They wanted certain players who fit certain molds they wanted, both on the field and in the meeting rooms. And I think he's very proud of the guys he got. Now, what he doesn't know is, are they any good at football? Can they all come together and play? But I think he's proud of the way he brought this team together. I think he's proud of the guys. We don't hear a lot from Frost in terms of player fusion. He was very, very effusive in his praise for the 4 players he brought with in the Big 12 Media Day, which you don't hear a ton from Coach Frost. So I think he loves what he's done to at least build this team, but he doesn't know, like none of us know, are they actually any good? That we're going to have to wait to find out.
Just to add one more thing, he did mention when I spoke with him, I asked him, you're not limiting expectations, but you also want to win. You don't want to just say that we're going to be mediocre forever. It's like, I'll tell you, if we lose in this Big 12 season, it's not because we were outclassed. He said to his guys just need to go out there on the field and execute, but it won't be because they were underprepared.
Robert, a change of approach from a year ago with Gus Malzahn at Big 12 Media Days in Las Vegas, where there was a great deal of confidence from Coach Malzahn that the Knights could make noise in the Big 12. Of course, that leads to a 4-8 season. Gus Malzahn no longer the head coach. Do you sense a quiet confidence from Coach Ross, or certainly trying to downplay expectations for Knight Nation?
You know, I think Coach Frost learned from his experiences over time. I think his time at Nebraska humbled him a little bit. And so when he comes back, I think he's avoiding those kind of huge expectations and trying to, and he's been actively since he's came back, since he returned, he's been actively trying to kind of tamper those expectations. He reminds people all the time that, hey, it's not necessarily going to happen like it happened before. The change in expectation, I think, between Gus Malzahn last year and Coach Frost this year is marked because, Gus Malzahn came in riding high with a vaunted SEC quarterback transfer that, quite honestly, didn't work out. And Scott Frost comes into Big 12 football media days without a quarterback. So there's a vast, vast difference between the two. I do sense confidence in his guys and confidence in his abilities to accomplish what he needs to accomplish. The sense I get from everything he said, if you put it all together, is it just remains to be seen if it can happen, if he can take all these talented individuals and make them work as a team in this short period of time. That's the question he's left with.
Joe, you're new to covering the Knights, so you're hearing Scott Frost, as we all are, but maybe a little bit fresher perspective. You haven't been listening to all of his press availabilities like we have. Mm-hmm. What was your sense of him and his demeanor on the main stage and when he addressed the media and took questions?
Yeah, I mean, classic sales technique, right? Under promise, over deliver. I mean, you don't want to get anybody's expectation too high, and then when you ultimately don't hit that, you run into what you guys were talking about last year with the 4-8 season. If you get people in a scenario, and get fans specifically in a scenario where they're expecting the world and you don't deliver, then that's putting your job at risk, basically. So, I mean, from the start, to go with what Robert said, I think the last couple of years have been a more humbling experience from him. And, I also think, like, this fan base can smell BS, right? Like, I think if he had come in, like, twirling a cane like the Music Man or whatever, or whatever that version would be, like, people would be a little wary. But the fact that he came in, seemed very grounded, set the expectation that he's just still understanding who his roster is, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, as I'm sure we'll talk more about, then, I think everybody's kind of understanding, like, this probably isn't going to be just, like, a very quick turnaround. Like, he wants to lay a foundation to, like he said, he wants to build a home here for his kids and raise his kids here. Like, he's planning on being here for a long time. I think he's okay if they don't set the world on fire in year one, if he lays, like, a solid foundation to keep building and building and building.
Just to add to that, that's what he marked as a successful year one in the Big 12 for him. He didn't mention, he's not claiming the national championship, right? He's not doing that. But he wants to say that these guys are going to execute and develop in his system for years to come.
Matthew, student covering the program, did you leave media days more confident in what the Knights can do in 2025?
Absolutely, I did. I was very impressed with Scott and the players that were at Big 12 Media Day. And one of the big takeaways I really had, guys like Kelly Lawson, Nigel Kelly, there's definitely a chip on this group's shoulder. And it's extremely evident in how they present themselves. Very polite, but at the end of the day, they made it very clear that, actually, I believe Kelly Lawson said in our interview with him, the world will be on notice.
Of course, the Knights benefit by there being no preseason media poll, which are completely useless, but had Arizona State pegged last, and it did set expectations that kind of dragged at them for a while. Let's talk about that chip on the shoulder thing. They know, though, that not much is expected of them, whether there's a poll or no poll.
Right. No, absolutely. Without the preseason poll, after what we saw with Arizona State last year, I think it was a good riddance. The expectations, obviously, I wouldn't say they're very high. From the realistic standpoint, like we've kind of talked about, the foundation comes first, and that's kind of Scott's plan. And with that,
yeah, Miles Montgomery, one of the featured players, big shoes to fill. And R.J. Harvey, he seems up to the task, though, of making a name for himself.
You talk about chip on the shoulder, and a guy like Miles Montgomery, who I think everybody in Knight Nation is excited who's back. We saw what he can do last year in kind of limited time before the injury. He told me that he feels like he's still underrated. He still has something to prove out there. And you talk about chip on the shoulder. I think this entire team, this entire roster, even the coaching staff, everybody's got a little bit of something to prove. We've mentioned Scott Frost. A name we all talked about a lot during the week was Alex Grinch, what he brings to the table. And a lot of folks obviously wrote him off. But a guy like Miles Montgomery, who we all expect to be a really productive player for the Knights, says to himself, I'm nowhere close to where I think I can be. He wants to show the world that they have mischaracterized his talent. I think Andrew had a great quote from Miles when he spoke to him as well, but that just shows you the motivation and the hunger that this team has. And again, I think it's an entire collective chip on the shoulder. It's not just one guy in Frost, it's not just one guy in Grinch, but you look at the entire roster, some of these guys aren't coming from major programs. It's a huge shift from what we saw from UCF in previous years. We're not taking the Ohio State and the Alabama Auburn guy. We've got the kids coming from FAU. And even know where Limestone's at? If you do, let me know. We've got multiple players from some place called Limestone. These are players with something to prove. This entire roster, I think, has something to prove. And we often hear, guys, that coaches want to build a roster within their DNA. That's why I think Scott Frost likes this roster. It's got that DNA of, let's go prove it out in the field. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to make big headlines about it. Let's go prove it in the field. And if a guy like Miles Montgomery feels that, you got to hope the rest of the team feels that as well.
You know, you mentioned the comment about DNA, and I think one of the strengths that Scott Frost brings to this program and in this locker room is he's kind of making them instant Knights, and that they understand what it's like to be a Knight. And I think that came through with the comment that you had when you were talking with one of the players. Can you share?
Yeah,
that?
no, it was Kelly Lawson, new linebacker, and he talked about at UCF. You always are expected to do more with less. And it kind of took me back because he's been here all of like 6 minutes.
Yeah, why does he know that?
Right? But I think the frosting is interesting, Robert, and the way you phrase that is you often get into a new situation and you lay out a series of goals for people. And sometimes the people you're talking to look at you like you have three heads when you say your goals. But one thing Scott Frost can say that very few, if any other coach can say, is I've done it here before. It actually can be done. Now, it's all different, I get that, right? But if you're a player, you want to believe in something, that man can stand up and say, I've done it here before. Look at all these highlights. Look at all these coaches that are with me that were here when they did it last time. And I think that's part of everyone kind of buying into that Knight culture. And for Kelly Lawson, a new player, to know what it means to be a Knight already, he's either a really smart and intuitive individual, and I hope that he is, by the way, or Scott Frost has done a great job establishing what the culture looks like.
That's a part of the brotherhood that they're building. They brought in guys like KZ. They brought in guys like Sean Beckton's here to promoting him to assistant head coach. I mean, you want guys like that who are gonna establish the culture. They said the classes on what it means to be a Knight. You're talking about the team building activities that they've had during swimming pools. Guys that never spoken to each other before. I was speaking with Miles. I was speaking with Nigel Leake, and they're saying hi to people passing in the hallways that they've never said hi to in their life. And that's something they just didn't do. They were saying hi to people on offense. The defense was saying hi to offense. Offense saying hi to defense. Speaking to all the staff in the building. And then circling back to Miles Montgomery, I feel like Scott Frost is so high on him because he's a guy who's been overlooked his entire career, he's felt like. Yeah, he's got stuck in Cincinnati, stuck on the depth chart. And then last season, of course, behind R.J. Harvey. I mean, there's not much you can do when you're stuck behind R.J. Harvey. But Montgomery has consistently proved that he can be a factor in the running game. And throughout spring camp last season and spring camp this season, he looks like a really impactful player. And I think he's just waiting for his opportunity. And that's what he said. He was just waiting for his opportunity. And I think Frost wants guys who are waiting for his opportunity. And he knew that in an offense that has such few returning production, that he could be the number one guy for Frost. And I think they're all bought into that system.
You know, to marry those two ideas together, I think one of the most interesting things I heard from Miles Montgomery was when he talked about following in R.J. Harvey's footsteps and being behind him on the depth chart last year. One of the things he said is that he tries to emulate things that R.J. Harvey does, but not necessarily exactly the same way on the field because he's a different kind of runner. But he talked about his leadership style and bringing that to the team. And I think that's probably an influence of Scott Frost in this locker room, bringing that out of Miles.
And he continues to talk to R.J. Harvey, now with the Denver Broncos, getting tips from him. Joe, is it though a time at media days where you just hear this cliche? Didn't we hear from 16 teams that may have a chip on their shoulder, even the favored ones?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, I think everybody kind of has to. I mean, that's the sport, football. Like, everybody wants to believe they're the hardest worker, they're the lunch pail guy, and I don't know, some are. You know, I think with UCF in this case, it's mostly true. You know, it's a lot of people who have been underappreciated or have gone through some scenarios where they maybe didn't get the best shot or just straight up didn't showcase their own abilities to the best of, the best that they could. I think Grinch is an interesting example because of, just the numbers that USC's defense put up there. I think there's a couple instances of that throughout the roster and throughout the coaching staff. Everybody's kind of been through some scenarios that they wish had gone differently, right? And this is kind of their opportunity to, prove themselves right and betting on themselves. So that's kind of interesting.
Maybe that's the slogan, redemption. Right. Let's go back on R.J. Harvey. Gus Malzahn, a year ago, we heard deep running back room, but kind of gave the ball a lot to R.J. Harvey. No problem with that.
Hard to argue with
didn't
that.
utilize the rest of the room. Go back to 2016-17 with Scott Frost. A lot of guys got touches. So maybe we shouldn't look at Miles Montgomery. Can he do what R.J. Harvey? That may not be what he's being asked to do.
Well, I think if Scott Frost has proven anything, he's not afraid to play the young player. If the true freshman is the best option at that moment in time, the true freshman will get the football. I don't think he's afraid of that. I don't know that previous regimes were on that same page, but I think Frost has proven, and we all saw it at UCF, right? We saw true freshmen and Adrian Killens and Otis Anderson get big touches in big games for UCF. I don't think he's afraid to do that. You talk about this running back room, Trace, something that happened this week, I don't know if anybody notices or anybody really cares. NCAA 26 came out. You know who the highest rated running back on that game is for UCF? It's actually Jay Nixon. It's not even Miles Montgomery, right? So that just goes to show perhaps the depth this room has. And I don't think Frost will be the least bit hesitant to turn to any one of those guys and say, I need a big first down, go get it. I need you to catch a screen pass, go do it. And I think if that's a true freshman like a Tavian Swint, it's a Stacey Gage, I don't think he's going to be afraid at all to tap someone on the shoulder and say, it's your moment, kid. But I think he's building that trust with the team now. And that's why if you're on this roster, I think that means that he trusts you. I don't think he would have you on this roster if he can't tap you in the shoulder on 3rd and short and say, offensive lineman, quarterback, receiver, whoever you are, I need you to go make one play. I think that's what he's trying to build. I think the running back room has an opportunity to do that.
Fun fact, Penny Boone was rated the
Who?
same. Penny Boone
Never heard of him.
was rated the
Where did he play?
was rated the same overall last game as Jaden Nixon at 88.
Well, that doesn't
But
make
it shows that Gus maybe didn't trust the younger talent on the team as much.
Penny
as
Boone
Gus.
wasn't young, by the way, but I
Yeah,
think
not
Gus
younger
just
talent,
trusted
but
who he
trusted
trusted.
RJ.
Yeah.
But I'm just talking about in perspective that Frost is willing to go out there with the best available talent. And he told me with the quarterbacks, which I'm sure we're going to talk a bunch about quarterbacks, but he said he's comfortable with all 3 guys out there, but he's just still waiting for a guy to make his life easier and step up. He sees qualities in all of them that can make him a starter, but he just wants to see more, and I think that's what he's waiting for.
And Matthew, Paul Rubelt there representing the Knights, Miles Montgomery. I think we expected those two. Maybe Nigel Lee Kelly, certainly not Kelly Lawson. When you spoke with players or you saw their demeanor, they do have that chip on the shoulder. You know that's being instilled in them by coaches.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it was evident first and foremost with the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, Miles and Paul, really great talent for UCF and going to be key pieces for the offense moving forward. But the defense is just hungry. And I haven't seen a defense, at least at my time as a student at UCF, really step up and have that sort of animosity and that hunger to them. And I feel like that, specifically with Nigel and Kelly, I mean, it was very evident. They're coming for blood and they're not holding back.
The defense, the strong part of this team, at least on paper, at least now.
If words from Coach Frost, he expects the 4 men up front to carry the load on defense. He expects the line of John Walker, Malachi Lawrence, Nigel Lee Kelly, and Sincere Edwards to carry the load on that defense. And then maybe the front 7 as well. The secondary, still a question mark. We know Philip Dunham is proved very strong.
Players keep mentioning Philip Dunham. He had a couple of picks in the scrimmage.
Absolutely. Actually, fun fact, he picked off risk, right? I think 2 days before he transferred.
The Stanford quarterback. Dylan, let's talk. You mentioned quarterbacks. Was it your statistic when you looked at who was at Media Days that 11 of the 16 schools brought a quarterback? Of course, UCF did not.
Right. 11 of the 16 brought quarterbacks. It was interesting to see that entire roster because some teams brought as few as 3 players. Some
Colorado brought a kicker.
6. Right. And so I think it's probably part of, in part, the normal cycle of roster changes that will happen from time to time, but also part of the new age of college football where you have more transfers and things are unsure. When you're bringing a player to football media days, it's an honor, and it's a message that says, hey, you are a representative of who we are. Frost doesn't know who the quarterback is yet. And as Andrew said, he said he would be comfortable with any of them, but he's waiting for the right one to step up to make his life a little easier, be more consistent. He's seen tools out of all of them that would make him comfortable putting any of them in a game. But I think it's specifically a situation for UCF that they just don't have that person yet. They haven't identified them. And can you imagine the speculation that would happen if he brought a quarterback to football media days? That's all people would be
That's
talking about.
quarterback one. That's quarterback
Right.
one in everybody else's eyes.
There's some veteran quarterbacks though in this league, Joe.
Absolutely.
And you got to think that plays into who are the favored schools. Coach Gundy from Oklahoma State said that he likes to have his quarterback decided before he goes on vacation. He's going on vacation out of Big 12 Media Days, and he doesn't know who his quarterback is. And
Yeah.
for a head coach, just as with Coach Frost, that is unsettling as a head coach.
Yeah, now I have a funny picture in my head of Gundy looking out at a lake somewhere, just grumpy, like crumpling a beer can, thinking about who his quarterback is. But yeah, I think the Big 12 is just an exception in college right now in terms of returning so much good quarterback play. I think 9 quarterbacks returned this year in the league that threw for over 2,400 yards last year, which is, I believe the stat was it's more than double the next closest power conference or something like that. It's fascinating to see how well some of these offenses function and how well they develop quarterbacks. But yeah, UCF was one of the quarterbacks that does, or one of the teams that doesn't know their quarterback.
BYU may not be
Yeah,
aware of
BYU,
their quarterback at the moment.
It's a very recent development.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't know who their guy is. Oklahoma State doesn't know who their guy is. It's a new quarterback for Utah, who UCF doesn't play this year, but I think is going to have a really successful season in Devin Dampier, who just tore things up in New Mexico last year. So
Well, he's got to prove he can make it at the next level.
Yes, I think so. It's very helpful, though, that he has the same offensive coordinator from last year. Jason Beck was, it's the same exact offensive system that he ran in New Mexico. So he's already, I listened to a little bit of his availability today. He's already kind of in there helping some of the guys that stayed at Utah learn the system that Beck brought over. So I think he'll be fine in the long run, as long as, his teammates catch up. Obviously, it's a team game. You got to have people block for him and catch the ball. But, he's starting at an advantage in learning that system. But
Although
anyway.
last year, based on quarterback play, all we heard from the media for months and months and months was how Utah was going to walk away with this conference title.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Cam Rising got hurt, right?
I mean,
Something.
that's part of it, yeah.
Joe's description of Utah just makes me think, though, like, you would think a returning quarterback in Ja'Carri Brown would have the advantage heading into the camp, but you're bringing in a whole new system. So yes, he's returning, but it's almost like he's brand new because of Frost's system. It's not that he has an advantage. It's not like somebody's coming in, has to learn the playbook, but they're all learning the playbook at the same time. And dropping a gem, not sure we'll look too deep into it or not, but when I was asking Frost, I asked about Taven and Ja'Carri. What traits about them excite you and possibly lead them to quarterback one? He said, I'm not going to talk about 2 without the third. Mentioned Cam. Did not mention Bobby Belfort, the most recent quarterback transfer after spring camp.
I think that makes sense. right? It seems wide open. When I was speaking with WWE wrestler Big E.
Say that again. One more time.
WWE wrestler Big E,
Yeah.
who predicted Arizona State, even though this is going to be a wide open Big 12, he's going with the proven commodity, but they've got a talented quarterback, Joe, returning. Do you think this is wide open, or it's Arizona State's to lose?
I mean, they've got a lot of guys coming back. They're going to be fun to watch. And just Kenny Dillingham, I think, has just done such a great job of building that roster. And I like the way he has been pitching Arizona State. He talked a little bit about that in his availability, how they're kind of a nice middle ground in terms of culture, weather, all that, between California and Texas, which are obviously, like, other than probably Florida, like 2 of the 3 best recruiting states in the country. So they have a lot of tools to kind of get talent from those 2 places, which I think is going to be super helpful for them in the long run. But as far as this year's roster, They brought a lot of good people back. One of their transfer wide receivers, I think, has really high expectations as well. I'm blanking on his name right now, but anyway, yeah, I like where Arizona State has as well, but I don't know if I can lock them in as the preseason champion right now, but I think they're definitely in the top 2 or 3 choices as well.
Matthew, you bounced around, we all did, between media sessions with coaches and players. You get the sense, though, that these teams think it's wide open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, but I wouldn't disagree with that. I truthfully do believe that the Big 12 is the most competitive conference out there. You don't know who's going to win. And I think also we talked about Scott Frost and the chip on their shoulder. I think that benefits us greatly in this environment because like we saw last year, it was completely slated that Arizona State was going to finish last and they ended up winning the entire conference. And with that being said, I think it's a wide open running. And I think UCF can easily find a way to win it.
Does the league need a dominant team, though? A juggernaut that everybody can point to and help propel them into the college football playoff discussion?
No, I don't believe so because I think you kind of fall into a trap. You see it with the ACC and the Big Ten. It's really 2 teams at the top, and the talent drop off is so substantial. I think it's a much more entertaining league, much more fun for a fan experience to have such a competitive atmosphere where you really don't know on a week to week basis who's going to win the game. So I think from a viewership standpoint, from a business standpoint, that's what you would want. And I just would never want the Big 12 to be top heavy.
But who won the national championship? The school that put a lot of money into its roster. And Texas Tech drew some comments from Colorado coach Deion Sanders with, I would like the money. You guys
give him some money. Yeah, I think he made his request clear. I think he said he needs more money. That's a lot. He needs more.
Colorado's sort of interesting, right? Everybody was talking to me a year ago with Shedeur Sanders and
roster turnaround.
Yeah, who's talking about Colorado in the mix here?
Coach Prime is always going to be at the top of headlines. It's just interesting to see now, how is he going to translate to coaching a team without Travis Hunter and his son, Shedeur Sanders, 2 of the best players in college football last season. Still like to think that Colorado will finish among the top 5 in the Big 12. And I think the recruiting, Coach Brown's recruiting is among the best in college football as a whole. Even though not the same funds, not the same resources, his pitch, NFL, the spotlight that comes with playing for him, I think it gives them an advantage, at least for the next couple of years, as long as they can keep winning. Keep that
it's a big if, though.
Yeah.
Big if.
Robert, Texas Tech spent a lot of money on its roster, including a big sum on former Knight Lee Hunter, right? Expectations got to be sky high in Lubbock. I mean, this is a program that's consistently been inconsistent and relatively mediocre. I don't think a Pop-Tarts Bowl in Orlando is going to be satisfying for a fan base that has seen this much investment in its program.
No, you get the sense, listening to the coaches and players talk, that they're not trying to hide expectations, but I don't think they're ready to publicly recognize how high they are, because they have, by all reports, they have spent some serious money on this roster. Deals were put through before the House settlement was in place, which allowed them to not fall under the same cap window that would now be in place. And when you spend that kind of money, there's going to be expectations that come along with it. And what will it take for them to be for that fan base to be satisfied? I think that fan base has to be in the hunt for the conference championship late in the season. Otherwise, they'll have to reevaluate.
I talked to a Texas Tech reporter today who said Big 12 championship game is where they need to be at. And if they don't get there, unless there's some injury or something, Joey McGuire and changes may be coming, but the championship game was kind of there. I know, Joe, you had something on that.
I was just going to say, I will not tolerate Pop-Tarts slander in any way. Put them in the freezer, especially the chocolate.
What's your favorite flavor?
Oh, man. The cookies and cream one.
Box brought to you by.
We're playing on top.
Yeah. Listen, Dr. Pepper and Pop-Tarts, I will take whatever you got. If it falls off a truck, send it to me.
A bunch of those at the media days.
That's in my backpack, just spilling out Pop-Tarts and Dr. Pepper. Yeah.
But expectations game, right? There's a high for Texas Tech. TCU as well. I thought it was interesting. Sonny Dykes saying conference championship. And when asked about that in the media availability, he said, this is a program that won all its games just a couple of seasons ago. Dropped, bounced back with 9 wins. You got to have those high expectations. So,
yeah.
But don't they end up, Adam, just all beating up on one another and costing themselves at the end?
I mean, that's kind of the recipe of last season, right? And, everyone talks about the Big 12 kind of being that league where even the coaches, we saw coaches roundtables, which I thought was really cool. You got to see 8 coaches at a time. And they all kind of said, hey, any one of us can win this thing. Anyone can go to anybody else's place, and you might not come out with a win. So I do think the parity angle makes the Big 12 fun from a consumer perspective. Now, again, what does that do for the voters and the folks who are putting people in the polls and bowls and all that stuff? I think that's where it gets challenging because it makes it hard to say who's really the best team here.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of really good teams, right? But the phrase I have all the time, it's not the Hall of really good, it's the Hall of Fame. So who's really the top of the team in the Big 12? I think that's what makes it hard. To Matt's point, having kind of that one villain in the conference is a little bit fun, but it's also after a while it gets a little bit old, right? So I do like the parity angle, and I think Brett Yormark is strategically thinking about how to market his league because he doesn't have that team, but he doesn't want them to kind of be that effort of collusion to say, well, they all beat up each other, and this one I guess is the best, so that's the best team. I think it's fun to watch, but I don't know that people who sit in that room in Grapevine, Texas, not far from where we are right now, really care about what's fun to watch as much as how good they think you are. And I think it may be tough to figure out how do you separate these teams in the Big 12.
I think one of the things Yormark said that was important was that he is looking at a future where the Big 12 will have multiple representatives in the college football playoff. And he thinks that the parity is the way to do that.
I had an interesting opportunity all week at Radio Row. I sat next to a BYU radio station who pumped out like 22 hours of content in 2 days, figured that out. And Brett Yormark was on their show, so I got to eavesdrop in. And he was asked by the host, well, why 5 and 11? Why not something else? And he said, why would I limit my conference to only 2? Right, that's his thought process of the 4-4-2-2 alignment. Why would I limit my conference to only 2? And to your point, I think he thinks or sees that this could be a 3-4 bid league. Now, what else is he going to say? I don't know if that's necessarily at the accuracy, but that's the bravado he's out there with. Is that limits me to 2, and he thinks there's an ability to have more than that coming out of the Big 12.
And really quickly, now that you mentioned that, when he was speaking at the big stage presser, he said, yeah, it might not be the most beneficial thing right now for his conference to have a 5-11 format, but he truly believes in the future, like you said, Adam, that it will be the best for the conference in the future. But right now, he said, it wouldn't benefit. And he knows that. He understands that there is no powerhouse in the Big 12 as there are in the other power conferences. But he truly believes that the Big 12 can reach that level of having maybe 3 or 4 consistently dominant teams, as opposed to 1 or 2 each season.
That's a risky play, though, right? Because if you cannibalize each other for a couple of years while you wait for it to get good, I think we all agree that from a business acumen perspective, I think the words it's used for Brett Yormark that's fair is probably maverick, right? He's not afraid to kind of do the thing, and I think he would sell the 5-yard line at every stadium if he could, right? And so it's a maverick approach to try that, but there's a backfire element where if all of a sudden you don't have that, now are you kind of too far behind an 8 ball? So it'd be curious to see how it plays out over the next couple of years.
I mean, I think what the ideal concept for Brett would be, there's going to be, I think he wants a dominant 1 and 2, but everything after that, he wants to be a toss-up, and maybe even the 3 and 4 can slide into the 1 and 2 spot sometimes. The closest thing I think to it is the basketball side of the Big 12. You consistently have Kansas, consistently have Iowa State, consistently have Houston. And then everything after that is a crapshoot. Everybody's going back and forth. But then occasionally you have the team that slides into the 2 spot. You have the team that slides into the 3. And I think that's the competition that he's aiming for in the future. But I think just rating-wise, you look at any other league, the ratings are the biggest market teams, the best teams, the consistently best teams bring in the best views, the best marketing. And it's ideal that you want at least 1 or 2 of those.
Well, I'll say despite what Commissioner Brett Yormark might want, I think he's actually doing a pretty good job at marketing what he has.
Yes.
Yeah.
He does not have we don't have a marquee. This is not a top-heavy conference. And so he's going to play to that strength and how he tries to market the conference.
It's still a new conference, right? 4 teams came in last year, 4 the year before that. There's some settling that goes on there. Mm-hmm. Joe, what's a team that we haven't talked about? We've mentioned Colorado, Texas Tech, TCU, Arizona State.
We haven't really talked about BYU in terms of their actual team. I like what Kalani Sitake's got so far. I think I was higher on them before their quarterback situation became in flux, but I think that's going to be interesting to watch. We haven't really talked about Oklahoma State outside of the quarterback spot either, so we could go down that road. And of course, the big other first year coach in the league, Rich Rodriguez and the West Virginia Mountaineers. I think that offense is going to be fun to watch. It's going to take them a little bit to kind of get the exact right personnel in there because it's a lot of guys left over from Neil Brown's team, but. The offensive guys that they brought, I talked to them a little bit, and they're having fun learning it, and that's kind of cool to see, especially since they have guys like Pat White and Steve Slayton still hanging around the program. So
I talked to a couple different national media reporters about the Big 12, and a school that I heard more than one tell me to watch out for was Baylor. Now, a lot of people are high on Baylor because their quarterback, Sawyer Robertson, who a lot of people think is the top quarterback in the Big 12. But Baylor was a school that, they had some rough stretches last year. They went on a bit of a streak towards the end. I think a lot of people were surprised Dave Aranda is back, so I don't think it's a hot take to say he's maybe coaching for his job this year. But Baylor was a school, Trace, I heard a lot from different national media reporters around, could this be the year they put it all together with a veteran quarterback in Sawyer Robertson? Aranda knows defense. He knows how to coach defense. He's done that for a long time. Baylor's a name I heard a bunch that I wasn't really thinking about that some national folks are high on.
Let's talk about Rich Rodriguez a little bit. Back on Scott Frost and the Nebraska conversation that developed over day one. I think it's interesting the storylines that are going to follow Scott Frost throughout the season, right? Can he replicate what he did in his first run at UCF? Does he get past his tenure in Nebraska? And now with Rich Rodriguez going back to West Virginia, you got two coaches in this conference that are returning. There's a sequel of sorts here with these two coaches. And by the way, they face each other for homecoming for UCF in October. So Scott's going to have some things to bounce off of there in terms of West Virginia. And can you beat them and show that your sequel's working better than Rich Rodriguez?
Yeah, different situations, right? I mean, Joe said it best. I mean, the offense is different. The players are bringing it's different. So I'm not sure how apples to apples it'll end up being, at least in year one. Maybe that's a better question after the third year to figure out how they rebuilt their teams. I think the interesting thing about Rich and Scott is while they both have a parallel in terms of they were good at a school, they wouldn't chase something else, that thing didn't really work out. Rich went on to have some success at other schools, right? He was okay at Arizona, and he got Jack State to a really good position.
Which isn't an easy job,
Which
right?
is not easy to do. And again, I understand the conference and the leveling, but he at least kind of took his lumps, went back to the drawing board, figured out how to make himself a coach that now can get a power job. Scott hasn't done that. Scott hasn't proven that period of time. So I think it'll be interesting to figure out the juxtaposition between those two programs. I don't know that you can tell in year one, though. I think this is after year two, year three. Let them kind of get their systems in place. But I think it will kind of be a nice neck and neck to kind of benchmark across the rest of their 10 years at each respective school, however long that might be, to kind of figure out how that really play out. And I'll tell you, I think a lot of the national folks I talk to were also really surprised, but think it's interesting that it's happening in the same conference. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know where this is going to happen outside of that, but I don't want to call this a trend, but people are kind of looking at, okay, like, will this be something that now becomes an option? It typically was always off the table. Bill Snyder, I guess, is the only example people can think of someone who left and came back and was successful. Is this back on the table for other schools? I'm not saying that's the thing to do, but I think it's interesting to see, but I think you got to give it some time.
We truly live in an age of sequels and reboots, and it's bled into college.
All the
football.
biggest movies.
Exactly. Like, I think people right now, I think that for whatever reason, we're just in a time where people want to go with stuff that they have previously seen work, or they have an impression that for what they believe still works. They're not willing to bet on something new or something untested as much. And I think that's an attitude that's shifting into college football for the time being.
You put it best. I mean, nostalgia captivates fan bases. Mm-hmm. Like any movie, you put on a classic movie, you feel comfortable watching that movie. You feel like, okay, I know I'm going to get out of this. Now, football, whole different ball game. You don't know if part 2 is always going to work. Sometimes in movies, part 2 isn't always better than the first. The sequel is unfortunate, but I think it's important to note that I think with the preseason poll of Arizona State last year and how badly they were predicted to be, I think the turnaround time in college football is now less than it ever used to be. I think teams are expected to get that turnaround as fast as possible. They want ADs, national media are expecting turnarounds now to be in 1 to 2 years. They're not expecting a 4 or 5 year process anymore. They're like, okay, they can do it. Why can't we?
Frost said you don't need 3 years of high school recruiting to rebuild a roster these days.
With the transfer, with the portal, everything.
And Kenny Dillingham talked about not necessarily acquiring other players, but retaining his players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hit on nostalgia real quick. Do you have a nostalgic factor where it comes to Scott Frost? Is it right? Is he a young guy? What does that mean for you with Scott Frost? I mean, we are talking a little bit about 2017, but that may not mean as much to.
How old are you in 2017?
I would.
Don't answer that.
What grade were you in at that point?
I would say, I mean, definitely when I was, looking at UCF as a school, UCF was kind of coming up and coming with Frost, and the success was there. And when I think about Scott Frost, I do think about that Peach Bowl season where they knocked off Auburn, and that's sort of the sense of nostalgia that I get. And see, that picture of him holding the trophy, that one that sort of is on at the front of everything, that's sort of the nostalgic feel that I see with Scott Frost.
You ask any college football fan, because I'm the same age range as Matt. You think about UCF, you don't think about a long, prestigious program. You think about the Scott Frost era. You think about that one season of pure greatness that happened. You don't think of back in the 90s. You don't think of back in the 80s. You think about 2017 and watching old YouTube clips, knowing that I was looking at schools in the Florida area to go and just seeing the excitement and the fan base around. It cultivated.
I was in those old YouTube
I know,
clips.
use your clips, 2014.
He was being polite and delicate in his
I
reference.
think I was
1992. Oh god.
2017. I was 8th or 9th grade.
All right, thank you for your
Can
contribution.
I ask
Should
something?
be allowed.
I heard all the last couple of days, and I know you all heard the same thing. Everybody I talked to, Arizona State, we're forgetting the one other option here. The media just doesn't know anything, right? The poll was voted on by the media, who doesn't watch these teams play. So while I understand that we can go, well, look, the worst team in the league, the media said they're the worst team in the league. A game hadn't been played at that point. So while I love the fact that there's the hope of factor, and I think we all want hope, we're also, it isn't like they were dead last in the league the year before that, right? Now, they weren't good, obviously. They weren't dead last in the league. So we keep saying the worst team in the league. Everyone was 0-0 at that point in time. And so while I understand the nostalgic factor and wanted to assume there's something there, like I also think we can pump the brakes and just, we anointed them the worst team ever when they hadn't ever played.
It's so useless, right? And Commissioner Yormark was asked by a couple different reporters. They so much want that content. Wasn't there enough content that came out of media days that you need to talk about that poll?
Right.
How about not even have polls for the first couple of weeks
Well,
of the
I think
season?
we're also missing the point too. I think a lot of people said, well, they're doing that so it didn't hurt Arizona State. I think it hurt BYU last year, not Arizona State. Arizona State still got in. They still got a top 4 seed. BYU, who probably could have been on the cusp of making the playoffs, didn't get in. And I think the theory is they started so low in the standings, hard time to catch up. So I don't think it hurt Arizona State. I think that argument doesn't make a ton of sense. I think it absolutely hurt BYU, which is why I do think it's smart to say, why bother picking things when we don't really know anyway.
BYU head coach Kalani Sitake raised something that I don't think took off as much because it got overshadowed by Chris Vanini's reporting about Scott Frost. But he mentioned 3 non-conference games and scheduling them against with power opponents.
Yes.
But that also led to the discussion in the coaches panel on Wednesday saying these leagues need to have the same type of scheduling model and not have different. They need to be playing by the same playbook here instead of rules.
Yeah, I mean, his suggestion of only playing non-con games against other power conferences, I hate it. I really hate it. Because then, like,
For the health of the sport? you mean?
Yeah.
How do these other programs, I mean, UCF took paydays to go places, and that's what programs like Jacksonville State and others do.
Yeah, it financially hurts, all these other schools. B, Mike Gundy actually said something I thought was interesting when I asked him about how the constant player turnover affects scouting opponents. And the gist of what he said was, for the first 2 weeks, you got to hope they're similar to what they were last year because you have no idea who's on their roster, how they adjusted to a new system. After the first couple of weeks, then you'll have a good enough sample size to actually put together a real scouting report and a real game plan. But I think that philosophy kind of incentivizes these power conference programs to schedule against G5 teams, against FCS teams, because then that gives them more margin for error to figure out who's on their own roster, and then they can, in the process, allow other teams to do the same thing, and then actually have tape to study of who these actual rosters are playing. And the third reason why I hate that is
Don't hold back. You hate it.
then why even bother saying that
the non-power conference leagues are competing for the same championship.
Although I'll say this, and I'm gonna bring in the fairy tale, right? I like to believe in fairy tales, and if you don't have these games between power conferences and non-power conferences, you lose the ability for those fairy tale moments, like when Appalachian State upsets Michigan. You know that they don't happen a lot. Oftentimes, it's the cupcake walk that where one team trounces another. But every so often, you get these wonderful, magical moments where a true underdog pulls that upset and beats a vaunted program. And as somebody that's been following, UCF football since the late '80s,
The old days?
we live for those moments,
It
right?
was on VHS. Okay.
Do you still have those?
They drew pictures of the game.
It was a video storage format. No, I love those. In fact, I'll find myself gravitating towards stories in the media about those upsets when they happen, even if it's teams that I'm not necessarily connected to, involved in, or covering.
Let's wrap up with this. Andrew, Matthew, first time going to a media day. What's your big takeaway? What was your favorite experience?
Really quickly, I did want to add to that conversation, especially about Sataki and the scheduling. One thing I did take away from the coaches' roundtable, and while some of them propose some challenges about that format, they all want equality. They all want the same schedule. Well, not same.
They all want Texas Tech's money.
They all want Texas Tech's money, but not all of them have Texas Tech's money. So they want a salary cap. They want a set budget. They want to know how much money they're going to get. They want to know the strength of schedule. Everybody should have an equal strength of schedule. Everybody should have an equal chance to get into the college football playoff. That's what they feel like is the standard for the next step of college football is equality. How can we make the Big 12 equal to the SEC? I'm not sure if it'll ever happen. Well, hard to imagine, but that's what everybody wanted. But yes.
Favorite moment. What's your
favorite
big
moment?
takeaway, your experience covering this?
Oh, I said it the whole 2 days I was there. I was just happy to be here. Thank you again to Robert for getting over here. A lot of people traveling with a wheelchair is very inaccessible, so great experience. But just getting to network and getting to speak with coaches, getting to speak with media, as I'm not sure when this is being released, but I did meet up with Deion Sanders again.
Is that right?
Name
I did. I don't want to name drop, but
They'll be making documentaries about Andrew by the end of the week.
yeah. So I was just grateful to be around such a great group of guys. UCF Media did a great job this week. We killed it. It was just that's my personal reflection on it. Just grateful to be there. It's such a unique experience. Stuff I'll talk about with my kids in the future. And then from a UCF perspective, I think it's just now we've gotten all the preseason hype out there. I think people it's still going to be a ton more, especially as fall camp comes. But I think I'm getting to that point where all right, let's get on the field right. I'm ready.
Yeah, let's play some football.
Let's play some football.
What about you,
I'm
Matthew?
warmed up.
What's your big takeaway? What was your favorite part of the experience?
I think my favorite part of the experience was first and foremost, like Andrew said, just spending the time with you guys and the team and learning sports media, as I'm probably the newest to this industry at this table. I felt extremely humbled to be there, extremely honored to represent UCF, Latavius Knights247, help out with the Sons. It was an incredibly fulfilling experience and really opened your eyes to the world out there in sports media. And I think my biggest takeaway is I think the Big 12 is in great hands. I think Brett Yormark is the future of the commissioner model that you want moving forward. And I think the league's in great hands. I'm really excited to see what happens this year on the field.
Joe, you're the grizzled veteran here covering media days and media events. What's, besides the Dr. Pepper, what was your favorite moment, big takeaway?
Mike Gundy talked about the way Scott Frost eats cookies for like a long time.
It was like a minute and a half soundbite.
Right.
I didn't know where he was going with it either.
If you guys put that soundbite out there, you'll know what we're talking about. But that was a pretty classic Mike Gundy moment. No, but the off season's long, and it was really nice to have this kind of moment that gets wheels turning that haven't really been turning since like January when bowl season ended. So to Andrew's point, it feels like there's light at the end of the tunnel. The off season's almost over.
Robert, you had an opportunity to cover it in Las Vegas and now here in Frisco, Texas. A different flair and flavor.
Oh yeah. That's this was different for me because last year in Vegas I was helping the Suns to gather information and help put together the things that were being put together for that. And now I'm doing it part of as Latavius Murray's Knights247. And I gotta tell you, the personal reflection, the personal takeaway that I came away here is that I'm just so lucky to have such a great team of people. Starting with at the top, Latavius. Latavius was actually here participating in some of the interviews, participating in some of the questioning. He's a naturally inquisitive guy. Not everybody realizes that while he was in the middle of his 11-year NFL career, he went and got a master's degree from Syracuse. And so he's a naturally inquisitive guy. And we were sitting together listening to Brett Yormark's opening remarks at the beginning of the session on day one. And he turns to me after Yormark is done and said, "Yeah, I want to know more about this aspect of it." I said, "Let's go talk to him." So a naturally inquisitive guy that wants to jump in and do this and be a big part of this. And then, of course, all of my writers and the people that you know, Joe described him as a grizzled veteran. He's a guy that I can give an assignment to, and he knows what to do with it. And the instincts of the two younger guys here with me, they're very, very strong. I spent a lot of time with other 24/7 people, and I was bragging on both of them the entire time. If you want to get a flavor of what some really, really good writing is from a young writer, I encourage you to go over to Knights247 and check out the work being done by Andrew, by Matt, by Joe, John Weiss, who was not with us, and Dolly Drama, who is not with us. Although we may have to solve that for next year. I think it would be a better trip with Dolly.
Just to be, they're still alive, by the way. They're just not here. So make sure we're clear. Shout out, Dolly.
From a football perspective, with regard to UCF, one of my most interesting things that I heard is in a discussion with Miles Montgomery. One of the things that he said to me, and I had to reflect and look back and think about what Scott Frost said when somebody asked him, "Are we going to be UCF fast again?" And he kind of Frost put the brakes on that. And Frost said, "We're going to do what's right in the moment." But then when I was talking with Miles Montgomery, I asked him about the specific differences he feels between the system that Gus had and the system that Frost has brought in. And his first comment to me was, "It's so much faster." And I was wondering, I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "But that works for me because I don't like to stay on the ground very long." So they're practicing from the end of a play to the beginning of play, being able to do that in a relatively quick fashion if they want to. That tells me that if the situation is right, that UCF fans might see UCF fast again.
Adam, what about you? Experienced the Big 12 Media Days in Las Vegas, and now here in Frisco, Texas.
I feel bad. I don't have an Emmy speech prepared. I can tell you what I didn't like was lunch. By the way, we got to get that lunch catering system worked out here. No, I think for me, as someone who covers this team and is around UCF and has been around for a while covering UCF, this is the first time you get to know the players on this team, especially in the transfer portal era. You know, we used to be able to know who's coming up and who to think about and who to be excited about. You don't know that anymore. So to get to spend time with Nigel Kelly and Kelly Lawson, figure out again how good of an individual Paul Rubel, Miles Montgomery are, just the connection factor and bringing those videos back, hopefully to folks who've watched them. Really impressive conversation with those guys, Trey. So I just love the fact that we got a little bit of connection with the players. It starts to feel real now. It's not just laundry you're rooting for. There are people who are putting pads and helmets and jerseys on every day, and to kind of know who they are now and know their stories, I thought was really cool.
I guess my biggest takeaway, and we heard it over the course of the panels, these guys, these head coaches, they just want to coach, right? You saw Scott Frost light up when he was around his players. They get tired of all this discussion of the rules of the road and the guardrails. Yet, you know what? They also open the door with this discussion on PayPal and the way the money's going to come in. They don't all necessarily trust the system that is in place as it continues to evolve and change. And it's going to be interesting to see if big money can win out, how you develop your players. You're going to see several different scenarios play out over the course of the Big 12 season. And, you know, covering the program day in and day out with UCF, hope springs eternal, right? You want to feel like Scott Frost is going to find his quarterback fairly early in preseason camp. And I know Matthew is bullish on the Knights, perhaps surprising and being in the upper half of the league. And maybe it can happen. You know, I don't think that story is the same as Arizona State's, but nobody thought much of UCF in 2016, and we saw how it paved the way in 2017. And Scott Frost is going to get an opportunity at that redemption. And Big 12 Media Days wrap up in Frisco, Texas, and the season really gets underway in just a couple of weeks as preseason camp gets underway. Tentatively, Monday, July 28th, and we will be in the midst of that coverage. Not only will Latavius Murray's Knights247, but of course, the Sons of UCF All-Star Roundtable panel at our square table. Andrew Cherico, Matthew Turman, Joe Londigan, Robert Aronoff. And for Adam Eaton, I'm Trace Trolko. Go Knights!
Charge on.